Yeah, thank you. Before I start, just to follow up on what Mark said, because I think that you up here, I think you raised an important point about what's happening with all the data that's being assembled, not only on an individual level, but even on an aggregate level. I think 1 or 2 weeks ago here in the Netherlands, we had a bit of a scandal in the media because the national company TomTom, which is a maker of navigation software, they aggregated all the traffic information of people. So where are people driving very fast and where are they driving very slow? And everybody who uses this navigation system is actually actively contributing to this aggregate database. And it can be really interesting because it can help you to avoid maybe a traffic jam. But what they did this time, they sold the aggregated data to the police. So the police could see on which parts of the highways people were usually driving very fast, and that's where they started to insert the new checkpoints, so they could find the people. So all these kinds of things are actually happening right now. But in my presentation, I will actually be or approach this subject from a more optimist, or maybe you could even say a naive position. The question that I want to ask today is what kind of new public spheres, urban public sphere, is emerging with the rise of this sentient technology. And if we talk about urban public sphere, of course, immediately places like this come to mind. I don't know, how many of you know this place? A few hands, yeah. Who here is from Rotterdam? So the majority is not from here, but I guess you've been taking a tour of the city today. This is, of course, the central square, the Schouwburg Square. It's, public space in the center of the city. Or another thing that immediately comes to mind when we talk about urban public sphere are spaces like this. This is the Unie in Rotterdam also. It's a building where usually lots of debates are being held. So this is the idea of the public sphere where we all go to and we have deliberate debates and we try to come to a consensus and make decisions about the future of the city. So these are, I would say, I guess, the two typologies of public space, the urban public sphere, and they have been here for centuries. They're the Agora and the Acropolis, places where we go for debate and places where we go to hang out, to meet, to trade, to show who we are, etc. So what's happening with the sentient technology is the fact that the city is no longer, and Mark and Michiel already pointed this out, it's no longer just a physical city anymore, but it is actually enhanced by all this technology around us, and usually we use these somewhat mysterious acronyms. I don't know if you know all of them, but it's not really that important. What's more important is actually what they do, and this is also just a very brief summary. Sentient technologies, they are the technologies that are everywhere in the city, and they sense what's going on, they aggregate the data, they can operate and actuate on it, and they can even learn and anticipate on what might happen and already change the environment to that. So that's actually happening to our urban public spaces right now. What does that mean then? I'm going to briefly look at 3 examples. And for those of you who are not from Rotterdam, maybe you've already noted that I use the background of my slides to give you some examples of public space, physical public space, actually in Rotterdam. But let's have a look at 3 examples of how this sentient technology is changing our idea of the urban public sphere. The first one is coming from Denmark, and it's a project, it's called Climate on the Wall. And it was done in Aarhus by the Digital Urban Living Lab. And I'll show you a brief film clip of what's actually happening. It's a project in the center of Aarhus during a theme week on the environment. And what they actually try to do is they try to stage a public discussion in the urban public sphere by using an urban screen or media facade type of technology. And the concept is based on magnetic poetry. I don't know if you know this. You have all the little words and you put them on your fridge and you can shift the words around and some sort of Dadaist poem will emerge. And they use that same thing here. You see on the bottom all the words. They're just going around there. And if you walk past it, like the guy just did, one of the words, they will become bigger and they will be turned into a balloon. and then you can drag one of the balloons and you can put them somewhere in a space, in the sentence that's emerging on top. It's Danish. My Danish is not so good, so I'm not sure what actually is appearing there. But the idea of this project was, okay, the urban public sphere is, a place where we go and we have discussions. So we're going to reenact this with sentient technology. The technology that observes you, sees what you do, and you can interact with it, and you can actually have discussion there. Did it happen? Not really. Of course, what always happens if you put something up in public space is that people are going to make jokes. So they're not going to put a serious discussion there, but they're going to, make some funny sexist joke or something on the wall with the words "are there." But what did happen is that discussions sort of started not on the wall, but the people who were watching the wall in the urban public space. So it was not so much the conversation itself that was interesting. The piece acted almost as a conversation piece. It sparked discussion among people elsewhere. So this is, an example of where you can use sentient technology to sort of reenact something that we already had, an agora, public discussion in public space. The second one sort of falls in the same category. It's also a way where this new technology is used to to make public space more interesting. And it's a flash mob that's happened here in the Schouwburgplein. I think about a year ago, International Pillow Fight Day. Who wasn't a part of it? People showed up and started to have pillow fights. And what's interesting about it is that about half of the people here are, of course, having the pillow fight. The other half of the people is filming it with their smartphones. So it's not only there on the screen, but the actual event maybe happens on YouTube afterwards when everybody uploads the little films. And of course, this is a very trivial example of what you can do with mobile technology and social networks to organize an event in public sphere. But I think what we've seen in countries like Egypt and Libya is how this technology actually can be used to claim the public sphere in a certain way and organize and et cetera. So it's not as trivial as this might look. Both examples are, of course, still based on this old typology of, the public sphere is bringing people physically together and having a discussion or showing who you are or claiming your rights. And the third example is this one that Mark just showed, the trash track example from the Sensible City Lab. And I think that this is a very interesting example of what the urban public sphere might look like in the future. Mark already explained the project. You follow the trash of people and it's being mapped, and you can follow your own trash or watch the trash of other people. And why do I think this is interesting? Why do I think that this is maybe a way of organizing the urban public sphere of the future? Because probably the first question that you're asking is, how is this urban? I mean, okay, of course there is a map and it's about things that are happening in the city, but how is this an urban public sphere? So I will elaborate a bit on that. Some notes on the urban public sphere. What is this urban public sphere? What does it do? And here's a quote. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, as most of you are architects, from Jane Jacobs. And she wasn't the first one who observed this, but I think she's one who put it most beautiful. She says, great cities are not like towns, only larger. They are not like suburbs, only denser. They differ from towns and suburbs in basic ways, and one of these is that cities are by definition full of strangers. Of course, I'm not telling you anything new. It's even so obvious that we usually don't notice it anymore. That the basic condition in the city is that we're dealing with all these people that we don't know, and not even do we not know them. Most of them are also very different from us. They have maybe different identity, different political opinion, different goals in life. Yet at the same time, we have to relate to them. We live together in the city, we have to decide about the future of the city, we have to deal with them in our everyday lives. And many of the theories of urban public space, they say that dealing with the stranger, that's what urban public space is doing. There are all these mechanisms that make urban public spaces work, and because of those spaces, we can actually live together with these strangers. I'm taking this quote from Frey and Beulen, from one of the pamphlets that Mark has been editing, and they're summarizing what Hannah Arendt has said about the public sphere, because she elaborates on that. She says, the public sphere is the site of collective performance. It brings together those who are different from one another precisely because they are different. So the public sphere is a place where we meet all those people that are different and with whom we have to relate in either discussions or through all sides of performance. And she says, the collective that acts in the public realm is not a uniform entity such as a class, a nation, or a mass. What brings people together is what separates them from each other. So we have all these mechanisms in the public space. And of course, we cannot go into too much depth right now, maybe later in the discussion. I mean, Jane Jacobs has a different vision on what actually happens in urban public space than Hannah Arendt or Sennett. But all of them describe the mechanisms of this public space as actually spaces that bring different people together, and then some sort of magic happens. And what the magic exactly is, we'll leave out of this discussion right now. But of course, that's a very interesting discussion in itself. So what the public space is, it's places in the city that, because of the way they are designed or their function or the place that they have in the bigger geography, they are places that bring different people together. And so far, in architecture, these places have been very physical. And interventions that architects and designers have been doing is mainly trying to bring people physically together in a different way. To look for social seams, as Jane Jacobs has said, or to look for weak borders, as Richard Sennett has said. I remember, just to give you an example that Richard Sennett once gave. He was involved in the designing of a market for the Spanish people in East Harlem. And at the time, they thought, okay, we're going to put this market right in the middle of their district, because then it's the center of their district and they can feel proud that they have a beautiful market. And then 10 or 15 years later, he was revising that project and he said, actually, that was a bad decision to put it in the center of this district. What we should have done is we should have put it right at the border of their district. Because if it's right at the border, then the people from the east, the Spanish people will come there, but maybe we'll also draw in the people from the area right below it. So in that way it becomes a weak border, as he calls it. It's a design intervention to bring those different groups of people that live in different parts of the city to bring them together. So mainly these interventions have been physical, right? It's the design of places, make them attractive, etc. Although it's not quite true. If we look at Habermas, who is one of the first, who is an important philosopher of the public sphere, he published a book in I think it was the 60s, on the urban public sphere, and he looks at the emergence of the urban public sphere in our modern days. And he sees that public sphere emerging in the coffee houses in 17th century England. And he describes how in these coffee houses people are starting to come together and talk about issues of a common concern. It's something new that then is happening under particular historical conditions. And he says that's the birth of a modern public sphere right there. But it's not only the place that people, where people are coming together to have a coffee and discuss things. A very important part in that place, or in those discussions, is actually the newspaper. What happened in those coffee houses is that people would read from the newspaper, and then they would discuss what they had read in the newspaper, and then somebody would write a letter to the newspaper to summarize the discussion or to bring in an alternative point of view. And one of the major newspapers actually had a letterbox right next to one of the major coffee houses, so it would be very easy for people to mail news to the newspapers. So what was happening there was actually the emerging of all these little public spaces, coffee houses, different sites in London, all drawing their own publics, but they were being united in some sort of a public sphere. The discussions were being threaded by the newspaper, where bits of the discussion would come together and then go down to one of the coffee houses and go back. So we're talking about physical urban public sphere, but media have from the beginning on had some point of way of mediating between those public sphere and playing an important role in that. So, having said all that, the question that I'm looking at is, how can we use these infrastructures that sense, that aggregate, that operate and actuate, that learn and anticipate, how can they be appropriated to organize publics? If we can no longer organize publics physically, or maybe we can still do that as well, but maybe these technologies give us another way to organize publics. And Frey and Beulen, in the Situated Technologies pamphlet, they say that we should no longer try to really assemble publics just in physical places, but we should try to organize publics around shared issues of concern. And we can use new media infrastructures to do that. So maybe these new media structures in some way or another can play the part that the newspaper did in the 7th century coffee house. And that's when I'm coming back to Trash Track, because in a way Trash Track is doing that. It's using the Internet of Things by tracking the trash that's being thrown away at all these places to map, to put a shared issue of concern literally on the map. It's showing us how trash moves and makes us aware of what's happening to the trash. And of course, the hope that people from this project have is that awareness of what's happening, might eventually lead to a change in behavior or discussions about it. It's also interesting to note that this project was done together with the library in Seattle, because the library says that our goal in society is also to organize the public sphere and bring out all the information that we have so that discussions can be held. Now that's an interesting thought, but it's also very challenging, because I guess the main question for designers, maybe people even like you, that if you're interested in things like this, is how do you move from just representation, from just a map, that's a beautiful image, how do you move towards a sense of ownership? How do you go from just tracking stuff and putting it on a map to actually organizing that public around that issue? I mean, it's a step that not automatically follows, and we're seeing a lot of that actually right now. We're seeing, I think, tens or maybe hundreds of projects like these everywhere in musea and art houses all over the world, and they're very beautiful projects. This is Lisbon, or actually it's a map of the traffic in Lisbon, the aggregation of the traffic in a very beautiful visualization done by Pedro Miguel Cruz. But really, what does it do beyond just being a beautiful map? How does representation of what's happening, how can you organize a public around that? How to move from mapping to interface. Interface is a term that Natalie Jeremienko and Benjamin Breton use to describe a system that's not merely a representation, but that allows you as a user to actually act upon it. And I guess in the remaining minutes, I'll give a few projects that are starting to do that in a way. Although I must say that we haven't seen many very successful examples, but we're also in the beginning of this emerging Internet of Things and appropriations in other ways than the smart city, as Mark has pointed out. This is a project, it's called Bike-tastic. It's done in Los Angeles by the Urban, I have to look it up, Urban Sensing Lab at UCLA. And they're also using actually tracking technology, the iPhone, to track people who are moving through the city. But this time it's bikers. So everybody who wants to join downloads an app on their iPhone, and when you start biking through the city, it registers, of course, your speed, how often you stop, but it also registers the noise around you. and the altitude, so if you go up hills or not. And the idea or the goal is that eventually, when many people start doing this, a biking map of LA will appear. You can see, which are the beautiful biking paths because there is no noise and there's not that much traffic lights, and which are the very, the harsh ones where cars are really almost running you down all the time and where you have to wait for the stoplights all the time. And the goal is, of course, that a map like that and a project like that will actually invite people to, maybe not drive but start biking, or to make the experience of biking better, or etc. So it's already a start. I mean, it's making the information at least useful on a personal basis, and intervening in the dialogue about pollution and traffic, etc. in a city like Los Angeles. Does it really do the interfacing thing? I'm not sure. It's a start. Of course, projects like this, like you mentioned, there's always this question of, how much data do you want to give away of yourself, and how is it going to use? So that's a whole other discussion that really should be held. I'm going to look at one other project. It's called In the Air, and it's done by the Media Lab, Prado in Madrid. And it's also a project, more a thinking exercise than an actual project. This is a project that's mapping the environmental pollution in Madrid. I think on the slide, if you look very good, well, you can't really see it, but what's the blurry beige, that's actually a picture of Madrid, and on top you see the polygons, and that's the level of pollution that's being mapped real time. And what I like about this project is it's not just this visualization, but there is also some tools around it that they have made. For example, they made an iPhone app, or I'm not even sure if they actually made it, but they are prototyping it, which is a pollution compass. So you have put the app, and you can see how dirty the air is, and then the compass tells you in which direction you have to walk if you want to have cleaner air. And they also have a travel or a navigation guide connected to it. So you say where you want to go, and then it tells you, okay, you're here in the city. If you want to go there, then you can either go by subway, you can go by bike, or you can go by car. And if you go by car or by subway or by bike, this is the amount of pollution that you contribute to what you're actually seeing there. So it's making this cloud of pollution not a big abstract thing, but it also tells you what actually your contribution is to it, and what you can do to maybe make it better. And what I really liked about the project also is that, because so far these projects that we've been discussing, they're all still virtual, but this is a project they're also trying to bring it actually back in the physical urban public sphere. This is, at the project itself, what they did was they made a big fountain somewhere in Madrid, and they colored it, so the water would be different colors and different heights according to the pollution levels. But you're also prototyping this set of little lights that everyone in the city can put on their balcony, and it will show the aggregation of the levels of pollution in the city, or maybe you can play with it so you can show your own contribution, or it could be tuned to a system somewhat similar to the one from Usman Haq that Mark was describing, but you're actually trying to bring these visualizations also again back into the physical city. So I guess that sort of rounds it up. What I really would try to tell is, how can we use these emerging sentient technologies? How can we use those to organize publics rather than just organize publics physically in the city? And the issues are, of course, how can we do that and provide the public that we want to assemble first with a sense of ownership, so that they have an idea, okay, this concerns me, I'm involved, and also provide them a way to act. Okay, this is something that I can maybe do about this issue, or this is how I can be part of maybe the discussion, or etc., etc. And maybe a fourth point extra is another interesting design question is, can we then also bring this back into the urban public sphere the physical one. Okay, that was what I was having to say. Thank you so much.